Understanding in this room today. See, if you've ever texted me more than like once, what you will end up finding out is I am a voice texter. Any voice texters in here? Now, because Siri is so smart, I just assume that everything in all of my gibberish is going to be interpreted appropriately. So what I do is I voice text it, and then I just click send. And then what ends up happening is I don't hear anything from people for like hours. And I'm like, why didn't you respond to me? I said I was 5 minutes from your house. And then I look at the text message, and it says absolutely nothing about it. You know, it was just horrible. Can anyone relate? Now, how many of you guys have ever been on the other end of one of my text messages, and you're like, that boy is not with it? Yes. Like, I have no clue what he's trying to say. Well, if that ever happens to you, just respond with the question mark, right? Voice text question mark. Nevertheless, we've all received weird text messages, and maybe even we've communicated something appropriately, but the person on the other end was having a bad day and they took it the wrong way. Anyone in here ever taken a text message the wrong way? We all have. Or someone else has taken your text message the wrong way. Maybe you sent something totally harmless, just a quick update or a joke. And suddenly that person gets upset, offended, or they just don't respond and they're distant for the next several weeks. You find yourself wondering, what just happened? See, in a world where miscommunication can spread faster than wildfire, of course, thanks to social media, thanks to gossip, thanks to just assumptions of people, it's easy for relationships to break down, even among people who love and trust each other. We see this happen all the time in families. In the church, we see it happen. And we also see it happen in communities. A misunderstood action turns into a conflict. A moment of celebration turns into suspicion. And the very people we fought beside now seem like enemies. And that's exactly what's going to happen today in Joshua chapter 22. The eastern tribes have done everything right? They obeyed, they sacrificed, they stood shoulder to shoulder with their brothers for years of battle. But when they returned home and tried to do something symbolic, something meant to preserve unity, it was completely misunderstood. And what followed could have been one of Israel's darkest moments. A brother preparing to fight another brother. And see, that can happen in here. In the church, that can happen. A simple misunderstanding or assumption now means, I no longer want to go to church there. I can't trust them. You know how many times I may have, or other people here at the church have had to go to the bathroom pretty quickly. We've all been there, right? Maybe you just had some stuff on your hands and you had to wash your hands. Well, what ended up happening is because you had some whatever on your hands and you needed to go to the bathroom quickly, you walked to the bathroom quickly just to wash your hands. Just something as simple as washing your hands. But what you didn't do is you didn't say hi to one person while you were rushing to the bathroom. And we've had accusations, not from you guys, from people who are no longer here years ago. Far back when this church was named Mechanicsburg Christian Fellowship. Long time ago. But accusations came about that this person doesn't care about me, and they avoided someone for months. Why? Because they walked past them. Well, number one, don't be that insecure. Come on, somebody. Don't be so insecure that if someone walks past you, that they don't care about you. Nevertheless, there was this argument and discontent in this relationship. Why? Because they walked past them to go to the bathroom, and they didn't say hi. And this assumption and this accusation just built upon the other person's theology and their love for them and their care for them. And it was simply just a misinterpretation of, I had something going on. And here's what I will always say. If I have an issue, and this wasn't with me, if I have an issue with you, guess what I'll do? I'll tell you. Amen? I'm not going to go tell your wife. I'm not going to go tell your kids. If I have an issue with you, I'll let you buy me coffee and I'll tell you about it. Stu, you want to meet this week? Stu, you want to buy me coffee? I have no issue with Stu. But what ends up happening is we misinterpret something. We hear one thing wrong, and then division happens. You know, in heaven, or in the beginning of time when God created Adam and Eve, it was meant for them to be together. We build ourselves up all the time talking poorly about people. And as I said a few weeks ago, you know who the most insecure people are those who talk about other people the most. If you talk about other people more than build them up, that means you're highly insecure. Now you're offended by me. Now there's division. It's just the truth, right? So misunderstandings are inevitable. It's going to happen, right? But what happened next here in Joshua 22 is important, because rather than rushing into war, God's people moved towards dialogue, understanding, and peace. And today we're going to learn from their story, because the truth is misunderstanding is inevitable. But how do we respond? That's where faith, humility, and Christ-like maturity, our Christ-like maturity will be tested. So this isn't just a story about ancient Israel. It's a call for the it's a call for the church today. It's a reminder that in a world that is ready to cancel, to condemn, and to divide, we are called to be peacemakers and not fire starters. Amen? You get to be a peacemaker today. So let's step into the story, not just to study it, but to allow it to shape us. A little bit of background, the context of Joshua 22. After years of faithful service in Israel's conquest, the eastern tribes, Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh, return home across the Jordan. Their mission, promised back in Numbers 32, was complete. Now here's what Numbers 32 says is, if your troops cross the Jordan and keep fighting until the Lord has driven out his enemies, then you may return. You have fulfilled your duty to the Lord and to the rest of the people of Israel. So what had happened is they kept their word, they're living into the promise, and Joshua 22 affirms this. You have done all that Moses commanded you, and you have obeyed every order I have given you. So what ends up happening is they've done it. They've followed it. They've answered it. Now they're returning home. So before crossing into their territory, what they ended up doing is this. They built an altar, not for sacrifice, but as a memorial to declare their continued unity with the rest of Israel. It was meant to preserve their shared identity in God's covenant. It was a good thing, but their intentions were misunderstood. These Western tribes assumed rebellion, and what they did is because they assumed rebellion of building another altar, guess what ends up happening? They said, let's prepare for war. Thinking that the altar violated God's law. So they heard something, they misunderstood it, now they're saying, I'm ready to kill my brother over this. Do you think the church does that today? I think that there's certain things that we misunderstand that we immediately go to write that person off, write that church off, write that leader off, write that member off. And just to be honest, how many of us have, better question, is there anyone in here, no, I'm going to ask, how many of you guys have ever written someone off because of something religious, right? We've probably all done it. See, they had good intentions, but they're misunderstood. And what was really meant to unify almost sparked a civil war. So there's a key insight that we have to see and we have to recognize here, is even faithful actions can be misread when communication is lacking. The altar wasn't the issue, the silence was. Amen? Communicate. Don't voice text. Preach. Oh, you know, it got so bad that there's an app called Grammarly. I downloaded Grammarly just to start overseeing my voice text to people, but it said, hey, Grammarly will have access to everything you've ever typed or will type. And I say, yeah, no, like, you don't get to know my passwords 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, whoops. So then I said, well, no, I'm just going to be dumb to everyone. I will be the thorn in people's side, or I just need to start typing. Nevertheless, silence was the issue. But to truly grasp the weight of what the eastern tribes were doing, we have to look beyond the stones, beyond the altar, and see the spiritual statements they were making. This wasn't just about geography. It was about identity. This altar was more than a monument. It was a message. It declared something deeper than emotion. It was a theological act, grounded in the covenant relationship between God and his people. So the covenantal identity and the centrality of worship, right? So the altar built by the eastern tribes was not merely a cultural or sentimental act. It was a theological declaration. In the Old Testament, altars were closely tied to covenant, right? Covenant relationships and divine presence. We could see this in Genesis 12. We could see it in Exodus 20. To build an altar was to say, we are in a covenant with the Lord and we worship him alone. But the issue was, by building a replica altar, the tribes were affirming their continued allegiance to Yahweh, despite their geological separation. It was not for sacrificial use, right, which would have violated the law. We see this in Deuteronomy 12, but to bear witness across generations. See, a witness between us that the Lord is God, Joshua 22:34. That's why they were doing it. They were building it for remembrance. This act echoes the biblical pattern of memorials. You guys remember several months ago when we were in Joshua 4. And in Joshua 4, we had the 12 stones. And you guys remember what the 12 stones at the river were for, right? To remember God's faithfulness. So that when generations upon generations would pass these 12 stones, they would come and say, what are these stones here for? And then we would be able to declare what God had done there. Amen? So all of us in our lives, we need some kind of remembrance. And that's all that they were doing, is they were saying, let's build this altar, because when we build this altar, it's not for sacrificial use. It's just to remember God's faithfulness in our life and to worship him. See, it echoes what happened with the 12 stones in Joshua 4 that served to preserve covenantal memory among the people. This altar wasn't just about honoring the past. It was also about protecting the future. See, the tribes weren't simply affirming their covenant with God in the present. They were also anticipating a time when the covenant, when that They were also anticipating a time when that covenant identity might be questioned or forgotten. And so, what began as a declaration of worship also began as a safeguard for unity, a visible generational reminder that they belong to the same God as the same people, even if they were divided by a river. So there's conflict. They were doing it with a pure heart. They had a pure heart, and we were going to remember God. We're going to worship God. We're going to future-proof that we don't forget about Him. So there's unity through remembrance. See, the eastern tribes feared future generational division. As a pastor, as leaders of the church, just because we're all people, if there is a fear in our life, we fear division within the church. So these eastern tribes feared this. And we see that in Joshua 22, 24 through 27. Their concern was theological, or even we could say it was pastoral. Joshua 22, 24. Here's what it says. No, we did it for fear that someday your descendants might say to ours, what do you have to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? They built the altar to prevent this drift. It was a prophetic move because they didn't want people to start questioning who God really is. What was He? What is He? It was just, hey, we're doing this so that we can maintain who we are. Carry Job, 1,000 generations, right? So it was a prophetic move against future tribalism. It was a prophetic move against religious nationalism. It was a prophetic move about spiritual amnesia. Spiritual amnesia. Anyone ever experience spiritual amnesia? I believe that America is experiencing spiritual amnesia right now. In other words, they were defending their spiritual unity they were defending the spiritual unity of God's family in the time when physical boundaries could easily become spiritual barriers. And Paul mirrors this with his theology in Ephesians. Ephesians 2, 14 through 22, just a blip of it, but you guys can take notes and go read the whole thing later. For He Himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one. His purpose was to create in Himself one new humanity out of two, thus making peace. See, the altar then is a tattooing of the unity Christ would accomplish between Jews and Gentiles, near and far. Amen? This moment doesn't just point forward to Christ's unifying work. It also reveals a deeper tension that still lives within God's people today. Because while the eastern tribes acted out of a desire to preserve unity, the western tribes responded out of passion to protect purity. Don't we see that happening in the church today? One side fighting for unity, the other side very questioning about purity. And God forbid we ever talk about love and sin in the same sentence, right? If today we were to talk about certain sins that Christian culture is super hyper scared about, there's a group in here that would go, he better say every word perfect or he's now woke. If you're that group today, just raise your hand. Identify yourself. You know who you are though, right?